Hello, and welcome back to This Month on the Railroad, my monthly trade news video segment. Before we start, I just want to have a quick disclaimer at the beginning, that being that this video will not include news from the last few days of January, as this weekend I'll be at the Amherst Railway Society train show in West Springfield, Massachusetts. So stay tuned for the next episode in 1 month from now to hear that news. Anyways, with that said, let's begin. In the spirit of starting a new year, Amtrak sent its two brand new Siemens ALC-42s number 300 and 301 to Chicago to begin their testing phase on long-distance routes. The two ALC-42s left Washington, D.C. on New Year's Eve, arriving in Chicago on New Year's Day. Upon arrival in Chicago, they were sent to Amtrak's 14th Street Yard to begin the process of crew familiarization and eventually testing. Continuing the trend of ALC-42 news, on the 6th, Amtrak ALC-42s 304 and 305 departed the Siemens Mobility plant in Florin, California, taking the California Zephyr and Capital Limited to Washington, D.C. This brought the grand total of ALC-42s on Amtrak up to 6, with 4 in the Northeast and 2 in Chicago. 3 days later on the 9th, New York City's iconic Bud R32 cars made their final run after a nearly 60-year-long career serving the citizens of New York City. These cars, originally built in 1964, made some fan trips on the Q line, with cars 3360 and 3361 being restored to their original blue and silver paint jobs. Luckily, 4 cars are planned to be preserved by the Railway Preservation Corporation and the New York Transit Museum. With the retirement of these 58-year-old cars, the oldest continuously operating subway cars in America are almost 5 years younger than the R32s, which really goes to show how old the R32s really were. Now, I'm not saying that the PATCO Type 1s and MBTA Redline 1500s and 1600s aren't old, but those were built in 1968 and 1969 respectively, and they look quite a bit newer than the R32s. The next day, more sad news came to us, this time taking place in basically the opposite of New York City, Montana. On the 10th, Montana Rail Link, a large short-line railroad in, Montana, announced that its operations would be taken over by BNSF once again at the end of the long-term lease of the line to the short line. This line has been on lease to the Class II railroad since 1987, but now BNSF wants their line back, promising that all union and non-union employees would keep their job, with the only big change being their employer from Montana Rail Link to BNSF. Now it's all up to the Surface Transportation Board to decide whether BNSF should be able to reacquire the railroad, so as of now, no official acquisition date has been announced. In case this reacquisition goes through, which it most likely will, catch MRL while you can, especially if for some reason you live in Montana. Also, for non-Montana residents, the Montana Rail Link's fleet of locomotives may be sold off to other railroads across the country if BNSF takes over once again, so that'll add an additional layer of interest to this whole ordeal. On the same day, Phoenix's brand new Valley Metro Siemens S700 cars entered service. These new cars will initially add to the fleet of about 50 cars, with the current total of 25 cars on order, but if the Transit Authority decides that they like these cars, they'll be able to order up to 63 cars, allowing for the replacement of the Kinky-Shario cars built in 2008. Perhaps I may see these new cars when I go to Arizona in February. Finally, on the 10th, Amtrak announced their intentions to object to CSX's acquisition of Pan Am Railways unless CSX obliged to their requests. These requests were to allow Amtrak to operate a seasonal so-called Valley Flyer from New York City to Pittsfield, Massachusetts, quote, multiple round-trip trains between Springfield and Worcester, and up to 2 round trips between Albany and Worcester. In simpler terms, it sounds that Amtrak wants to begin a corridor service between Boston and Springfield, Massachusetts, a twice-daily service between Boston and Albany, and a seasonal train to Pittsfield, which is pretty consistent with the Amtrak Connects Us map from last year. Luckily for me, I live between Boston and Worcester, so I could be seeing increased Amtrak trains through my town in the near future, and also this might actually happen, considering that CSX will pretty much do anything for this merger to happen, and they're at the mercy of Amtrak to an extent. A couple days later on the 12th, Atlanta Metro MARTA released renderings of the new Stadler CQ400 cars, set to be delivered between 2023 and 2028. This rendering shows a modernized version of the very 80s paint scheme seen on the older cars, some of which have been in service since 1979. This fleet of 254 cars will replace the entire fleet of older cars by 2023, with options for 100 additional cars included in case MARTA wants to increase service. These new cars are very unlike the normal subway cars we see in America, being more reminiscent of the Munich U-Bahn C1 cars, and for that I think rail fans will either love them or hate them. On the 18th, Florida higher-speed rail provider Brightline began running test trains between West Palm Beach and Cocoa, Florida on the Florida East Coast Main Line. This line north of West Palm Beach is pretty much uncharted territory for Brightline, but in just about a year, Brightline will start using this part of FEC's line regularly for their Orlando extension. Once again, this is me singing praises of Brightline for staying on time with their Orlando extension, which is on track to be completed in late 2022, beginning service in early 2023. On the same day, another interesting thing happened that had to do with the next generation American diesels, that being an Amtrak ALC-42 bringing up the rear of Empire Builder Train 7. ALC-42 number 300 was seen helping to push Train 7 west out of Chicago. The locomotive was put on the back of the train to allow for an easy drop-off in St. Paul, Minnesota for crew exercises, but since 301 was running MU and was synced to the P-42s up front, this was technically the first Amtrak train with a distributed power unit. Finally, the last bit of news from the 18th was that Amtrak's two TALGO trains, originally intended for use on the Hiawatha, have found an owner after sitting unused for almost 10 years. These two 8-car trains were originally part of an order for equipment to be used on Amtrak's Hiawatha in Wisconsin, but when the order was canceled due to a change of political leadership, these two train sets were already completed, so they sat unused for years, until finally, almost 10 years after their construction, the government of Nigeria has purchased these two orphan trains for an undisclosed amount of money. These two basically brand new trains will be used for a new commuter service in Lagos, the biggest city in Nigeria. As of now, there's no confirmed date that these trains will be shipped, but it's likely that they'll make one last move in America to get from TALGO's plant in Milwaukee to an eastern part of the United States to be shipped across the Atlantic in the coming months. On the 20th, short line holding company WATCO announced their interest in battery locomotive technology, which seems to be quite a popular thing for railroads to do right now. WATCO says that they plan to convert an SW1200 and an SW1500 switcher to battery power using funding from a Texas Emissions Reductions Plan grant. These two locomotives are expected to enter service by the end of this year, eventually serving as switchers in Houston, Texas. On the same day, Conrail Historical Society shared some unfortunate news for Conrail fans such as myself. Around this time, it was revealed that Progress Rail had scrapped their final SD80 Mac acquired from Norfolk Southern. These 23 units were at one point an iconic locomotive on Conrail, but nowadays only 6 more remain, with those 6 being used for parts on Canadian Pacific. For a while, Conrail Historical Society had been trying to work out a deal with Progress Rail to acquire an SD80 Mac to be preserved, but after the locomotive prime movers were removed for maritime use, Progress Rail has seemingly been insistent on scrapping these unique locomotives. Unfortunately, at this point, all Progress Rail SD80s have been reduced to scrap metal, and the chances that Conrail HS can acquire a CP SD80 are pretty low, so this may be the end for these iconic locomotives. A few days later, on the 24th, Amtrak cut service due to poor ridership numbers, limited labor, and rising COVID numbers. With these changes, most long-distance routes were cut to 5 times per week, and that's really all I have to say. Can you tell that I'm sick of talking about COVID? More excitingly, on the 24th, Canadian Pacific released a video of their brand new H2OEL locomotive rolling out of their shop with a completed paint job. This H2OEL is the first of 3 hydrogen locomotives for the Canadian Pacific. This H2OEL number 1001 is set to begin testing soon, and in a few months it'll be joined by another SD40-2F based road locomotive and 1 hydrogen switcher. Finally, the last notable thing that happened on the 24th was that someone saw Amtrak ALC-42 number 309, the first unit painted in Phase 7 paint at the Siemens Mobility plant in Florin, California. 309 was spotted sitting outside the shop awaiting its decals, so 309 won't be delivered until at least February, but 309 looks really good in this brand new paint scheme. On the 25th, Brightline broke ground for its new station in Boca Raton. Boca will join Aventura as one of the 2 new stations being built between Miami and West Palm Beach this year, with service set to begin at these stations in early 2023. Additionally, on the same day, a second new Brightline train left the Siemens plant in Florin, California. This train set will be called Bright Blue 2, and it'll probably test along with the recently delivered Bright Red 2 train set along the new West Palm Beach to Orlando route. This leaves 3 more Brightline train sets and 1 single locomotive that are yet to be delivered, although word on the street is that the next train will be leaving Florin soon, as it was originally planned to be coupled up to Bright Blue 2 and put on the same delivery train. Remember last episode where I mentioned that Norfolk Southern would be receiving 10 new SD70 Aces from Progress Rail in 2022? On the 26th, NS officially retired 20 SD70 ACUs and began the process of shipping them to Progress Rail as a trade for the new SD70 Aces. These SD70 ACUs were rebuilt from ex-Union Pacific SD90 Max a few years ago, and now they'll return to Progress Rail where they were rebuilt. As of right now, nobody knows what will happen with the 20 SD70 ACUs at Progress Rail, but my guess is that they'll be sold or leased to Canadian Pacific, which is the only other operator of SD70 ACUs. Other than that, they may go off to another railroad, but chances are they won't be scrapped. as they were rebuilt relatively recently. Anyways, that's January. As I said in the intro, I'll cover any news that happened after the 26th in next month's episode, as with the train show that I attended over the weekend, it would be hard to make this video later in the month. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video.